Ladies and gentlemen, good morning for everyone. And as it was already mentioned, and I confirm it, my name is Oręziak. I am PhD in legal sciences and assistant professor in the Institute of Justice in Warsaw. And in the same Institute of Justice, I am also the head for the Center of Strategic Analysis. But what is here the most important, I think, I have also pure pleasure to be a member of the Central European Process Network 2023, coordinated by Central European Academy, exactly in the research group Migration Challenges, Legal Responses, headed by Professor Marcin Wielec. And in fact, that is the reason I'm talking to you here in this beautiful building of Central European Academy. And before I start my presentation, I would like extremely congratulate and strong thanks to organizers of today's conference. Your work for me is awesome. Thank you very much, both substantive and organizational team from Central European Academy. And now going to the topic of my speech. Today I will be talking about 3 barriers to the competences of the European Union in migration and refugee law. And my aim is to present you the interpretation of law according to the competences of the European Union in migration and refugee law. But what is, in my opinion, quite important, that also fit for entire EU legal system. So this will be some kind of systematic interpretation. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to emphasize that this will be a creative analysis of EU primary law and will mainly be based on the interpretation of 3 fundamental barriers, which I'm about to present and tell you what my idea is. But what I will present to you is the only signal of research I did in the research group Migration Challenges, Legal Responses in ProfNet 2023. The whole study can be read, of course, after the publication within my scientific article entitled Limit and Use of EU Competences, General Considerations in the Context of Policies on Border Checks, Asylum and Immigration, which I accordingly invite you to read when it will be possible. And ladies and gentlemen, as in our research group, everybody knows that I am the guy to make a lot of reminders. So now I will also make a reminder. But this time it will be not a reminder about our tasks, but it will be the reminder from international law. And the first reminder, in my opinion, very important, that the European Union, based on actual applicable law, is not a state. It is not the country. And that means that EU is not a sovereign. So the European Union is an international organization established by EU member states. The second reminder is that the European Union is formed by sovereign states that have not relinquished their sovereignty. All member states retain full sovereignty. The third reminder is that the EU is an international organization established to achieve common goals indicated by EU member states. That is why EU has some competences, for example, in the migration and asylum affairs. The fourth reminder is that the EU does not have its own competences as an international organization. The source of EU competences are the competences of the member states, relating from their statehood and sovereignty. And the last one, the fifth reminder, is that the nuclear weapon is, of course, the sovereignty. It is the United Kingdom case, but before you press the red button, it is what indicates that the member states have decided for additional safeguards included in the text of the primary EU law. We are talking about these 3 barriers, but in my opinion, unfortunately, a mistake was made here, and that's why this protection doesn't work today. I will tell you what I mean in a moment, and what are these 3 barriers? All these defensive barriers are expressly provided for in EU primary law. We are talking about Article 5 of the Treaty on European Union, and in accordance with Article 5, paragraph 1, it is clear that the limits of union competences are governed by the principle of conferral. The use of union competences is governed by the principle of subsidiarity and proportionality. So first, it is principle of conferral based on Article 5, Paragraph 2, Treaty on European Union. Second, it is the principle of proportionality based on the Article 5, Paragraph 4, Treaty on European Union. And the last one is the principle of subsidiarity based on Article 5, Paragraph 3, Treaty on European Union. And what is important here, this principle of subsidiarity works in areas which do not fall within EU exclusive competences. Here, what is important, migration and asylum affairs are shared competences, so in migration and asylum, this principle also works like conferral and proportionality. And what is important, in my opinion, these three principles, first of all, are a watchdog, keeping an eye on European Union. The norms of EU primary law are extremely general, therefore, and do not say much. For example, in the area of migration and asylum, they say that the EU has, for example, the competence to adopt legal measures to harmonize the rules for granting international protection. Please see, for example, only Article 77 or 78 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. But what does that mean exactly? The content of these norms, what it means, it could be all or nothing. Whatever this is all or nothing, in my opinion, should be determined by the interpretation of these three principles. That is why, secondly, I believe that these principles are meta-norms. This is legal norms that determine the legality or validity of other norms in the EU legal order. This is the foundation that should protect against, for example, competence creep, but it is. So the first is the principle of conferral. Why it is the first? Because only the principle of conferral refers to the limits of the EU competences. It is very clear in the EU primary law that the EU, firstly, as an international organization, it does not have its own competences. Secondly, that the sources of the EU competences is the competences of EU member states. And thirdly, that the scope of EU competences overlap with those conferred by the member states. Here is in an equal sign. So, what is the function? Function of this principle? In my opinion, this principle protects the sovereignty of the member state by protection against competence creep, theft, or plunder by EU. And what is the practical meaning of this principle? EU can do something or not, 1 or 0. And what decides? Provisions of EU primary law that specify competences such as the already mentioned in the scope of migration and asylum affairs like Article 77 or 78 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union. But what's the problem? In my opinion, the problem is that these provisions are too general and require a broad, wide interpretation based on the purpose of this regulation. This leads to the situation that it is not the wording of the provision that itself that decides on EU competences, but its creative interpretation. So the question is, what is the key? And second, principle of proportionality. The principle applies to the use of, this principle applies to the use of EU competences, but to the extent of necessity. EU primary law explicitly provides that the content and form of union action should not exceed what is necessary to achieve the objectives of the treaties. So what is the function of this principle? In my opinion, this principle protects the sovereignty of the member states by protection against the intensity and strength of the EU action. So what is the practical meaning of this principle? EU should act as gently as it works. What decides? Provision of EU primary law on principle of proportionality. So, in my opinion, not only the form, but also the content of EU action should not go beyond what is necessary. This not only means that first the soft law, then the directive, then the regulation, and this is not means only that first signaling, then conversation, then request, and then hard law, but it also means that the more intense and strong the EU action are, the more precisely justified they should be. So what's the problem? And in my opinion, EU primary law does not define how we should understand what is really necessary in scope of, for example, asylum and migration. And this is an enigma, and that is why it required broad, wide interpretation based on the purpose of proportionality, which say what means necessary, because it could be all or nothing. This leads to the situation that, as previous, that it is not the wording of the provision itself that decides on the necessity of EU action, but its creative interpretation. So the question also is, what is the key? And the last one, principle of subsidiarity. This principle applies to the use of EU competences, but in terms of action priority within EU. EU primary law explicitly provides that in non-exclusive competences, and migration and asylum, of course, are shared competences, the Union acts only if and insofar as the objective cannot be sufficiently achieved by the member states, but can rather, by reason of the scale or effects of the proposed action, be better achieved at Union level. So what is the function of this principle? This principle protects the sovereignty of the member states by protection against the replacement of states by the EU. So what is the practical meaning of this principle? EU acts as actor only if goals needed. What decides? Provision of EU primary law on principle of subsidiarity. And the essence is that the member states that are in the foreground, not EU. If the member states can meet on national level these goals that otherwise they indicated when they founded the EU, and if so, then there is no space for EU actions. The first level is the member states, and only if something doesn't work here is the second level, which is the EU. So what is the problem here? In my opinion, EU primary law does not indicate what means that goals cannot be sufficiently achieved by the member states and what means that some goals could be better achieved at Union level. For example, EU wants a new pact on migration and asylum, but does the EU act in accordance with the principle of subsidiarity here? In my opinion, this is an enigma, and that is why it requires broad, wide interpretation based on the purpose of subsidiarity, which say what it means, because it could be all or nothing. This leads to the situation that it is not the wording of the provision itself that decides on understanding the subsidiarity within EU, but its creative interpretation. So the question is the same. What is the key? So, ladies and gentlemen, now is the time for the key. In my opinion, key is a decision maker. The normative character of the presented triad of the principles is general, and therefore, as I have already mentioned, the creative interpretation is decisive. That's why the decision maker is the key. And it is now clear that even in the light of the Article 19 of the Treaty on European Union, the Court of Justice of the European Union decides on the interpretation of EU law. However, my presentation is not about how things are, but how things should be, so that it would be better counteract competence creep or blurring the status of the EU as an international organization. And the essence of creative interpretation of the triad of principles is to find their purpose or spirit. But let us remind ourselves that, in my opinion, the EU is not an equal partner for states in the light of international law, because states are the most important actors and the EU is merely an international structure. The EU serves to achieve the goals set by states, not other way around. Ladies and gentlemen, it must be emphasized that states in relation to the EU have the status of a creator, in my opinion, regardless of whatever they were part of the EU from the beginning or joined it later. And all this means, what is very important, that it was the states that determined the content of the currently applicable primary law of the EU through the act of ratification. In my opinion, from the perspective of international law, the interpretation of the principle from Article 5 of the Treaty of the European Union is determined by the real will of the state at the moment they bound themselves by the provision of EU primary law. This arises from the very important principle, pacta sunt servanda. because this principle emphasizes that it is not only treaties that must be kept or upheld, but also the fact that if states agreed for something, they know what they agreed to. So let us not ask the Court of Justice of the European Union what the will of the states was, but let us ask those states what the sovereign decision was. Just as I want to know what my wife thinks, I ask her directly. I don't call my mom in the law, and we together don't ponder together what she thinks. What is important, this applies, in my opinion, and my idea is that it should apply only to matters of these three principles because they are meta-norms. They determine the validity of other legal norms in the EU. Other norms can be interpreted by the Court of Justice of the European Union. And this is related to another crucial principle of international law, nemo iudex in causa sua. We ask the Court of Justice of the European Union, which represents the EU, whatever the EU can do something, and if it can, whatever it does it correctly. So the EU decides in its own case, where it has both a factual and legal interest. In my opinion, let's ask the state because they are sovereign and have the right to exercise their national powers. Ladies and gentlemen, the current situation leads to the pathology, in my opinion, where the principle from Article 5 of the Treaty on the European Union become illusory watchdogs because the EU is overseeing itself. And I have to say this because I believe that watchdog should be more like a Cerberus, not like Chihuahua. So therefore, in conclusion, I propose that states should be central decision makers in interpreting the principle from Article 5 of the Treaty on European Union. Not only in asylum and refugee affairs, of course this is important here, but not only, but in a whole EU legal system. In my opinion, it is not the EU institutions, but states that should express their opinion on the real scope of their will from the moment of binding the current version of EU primary law, because they created the EU, the sources of the EU competences are the state's sovereign powers, also in the field of asylum and refugee. States defined the content of the principles from Article 5 of the Treaty of the European Union, and these states have the most complete information regarding the real image of their will. And I believe that in such a situation, states will not be a judge in its own case, because there is no dispute here, but sovereign decision-making on the scope and form of exercising state powers. In my opinion, this is the essence of sovereignty. What is important here, such a proposal, in my opinion, is fully in line with all principles of international law, which have always placed states at the center. And this accent, I would like to end my speech, and thank you very much for your attention.